Which country do you reckon holds the title as the most innovative in the world? The immediate contenders that probably cross your mind are the United States, South Korea, or Germany, each known for their vast scientific and innovative sectors. However, there's another contender that trumps them all in research and development investment and has even surpassed them in outcomes. Commonly known as the Silicon Valley of the East, a small Middle Eastern nation on the shores of the Mediterranean, a home to a population of 9.4 million people, and an astonishingly vigorous economy. Israel stands tall as the world's top country in terms of per capita research and development investment. The surprising factor here is that Israel's economy faces more challenges than it has advantages. An in-depth review of Israel's economic journey necessitates an understanding of its historical geopolitical complexities and often strained relationships with neighboring countries. It's a well-established fact that economies tend to prosper when there's a harmonious relationship with neighboring nations, an advantage that Israel unfortunately lacks. This geopolitical isolation poses considerable economic challenges for Israel, limiting direct trade opportunities, requiring a significant portion of the national budget to be allocated for defense, and making oceanic routes the sole conduit for global trade. While oceanic trade is often the preferred method, alternative options such as oil pipelines are beneficial, especially for commodity transportation. However, Israel also lacks substantial natural resources, arable land, and a large enough population for inexpensive manufacturing. In 2009, Israel spent over 5% of its GDP on energy imports, making it vulnerable to supplier countries, many of whom had strained relations with Israel. Additionally, this heavy expenditure on energy created hurdles for economic growth and competitive industries as a significant chunk of capital was sent overseas, quite literally, to keep the lights on. Despite formidable challenges, Israel has managed to carve out a position as one of the globe's wealthiest and most technologically advanced economies. It has achieved an economic output that not only overshadows its immediate neighbors by a tenfold, but also outpaces leading economies like Canada, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. However, this picture of prosperity wasn't always the case. Until the 1990s, for a considerable time, Israel's economy was heavily influenced by socialist ideologies, with an interventionist government holding the reins of its economic policies. This methodology unfortunately resulted in only modest economic outcomes. Israel's past economic state mirrors the current conditions in countries like Turkey, Pakistan, Lebanon, and Sri Lanka. Economies struggling with political instability, sluggish economic growth, rampant inflation, and a pervasive loss of confidence in their economic systems. So, how exactly did Israel ascend to the rank of a global powerhouse? What's the underlying secret that allowed it to top the global charts in R&D investments? What are the primary drivers of its economic development? And can other countries replicate this success amidst similar challenges? One might think that Israel's economic triumph is due to being the United States' favored ally in the Middle East, or the hefty aid and investments showered by Western powers. However, this is far from the truth. Here's a fact that might surprise you. For a significant part of the 20th century, Israel was on the verge of becoming a socialist country. Until the 1990s, Israel's economic landscape was rather bleak, with major European nations nearly doubling Israel's income. Israel's economic management during this era was far from ideal, making it more comparable to Latin American countries than to the United States. This comparison with Latin America refers primarily to the rampant populist and interventionist movements prevalent in that region. For example, between 1974 and 1986, Israel consistently endured an inflation rate above 30%, a figure 3 times the inflation rates observed in developed countries even post the Ukrainian war. The situation further escalated in 1984 when Israeli inflation hit an astronomical peak of almost 450%, which translated into hyperinflation exceeding the levels seen in Venezuela in 2015. So, you may wonder, why was Israel plagued by such high inflation during this period? The root cause, as is often the case, was the Israeli government's chronic overspending. There were years when government expenditure surged to over 76% of the GDP. To fund this extravagant spending, the government had no other recourse but to resort to excessive money printing, much like Venezuela's approach. Furthermore, Israel's economy was besieged by numerous other challenges synonymous with Latin American countries. An inefficient array of public enterprises, severe price controls, and a financial system buckling under de facto dollarization characterized the Israeli economy. It wouldn't be a stretch to label Israel as a full-fledged banana economy during this era. However, by the 1990s, Israel had performed a complete about-face. The country underwent a series of significant political transformations that evolved Israel from an economically immature nation to the technological powerhouse that it is today. Until the mid-1980s, Israel was grappling with an annual inflation rate exceeding 400%, rendering its currency, the Israeli shekel, virtually useless. Most people opted to use foreign currencies like US dollars, which created additional problems. For instance, it limited the government's control over economic matters. Attempts to raise taxes in dollars could either devalue the local currency or admit that their currency had lost its worth. This situation is akin to a chicken and egg problem that central banks try to solve by managing the money supply and increasing interest rates. Let's take Turkey as an example. Recently, the country has faced significant inflation issues. However, its government's intervention to lower interest rates instead of allowing the central bank to raise them only exacerbated the issue. This is because high inflation can deter foreign investors and complicate business contracts. In an attempt to regain economic control, Israel introduced a new currency in 1985, the new Israeli shekel, replacing the old shekel that had essentially become worth less. However, the challenge was to persuade the public to use this new currency instead of the stable and globally recognized US dollar. Imagine being asked to switch to a new currency after the previous one had significantly dropped in value. You'd need assurance that the new one wouldn't face the same fate. So, the Israeli government, led by Shimon Perez, rolled out a 5-point plan alongside the introduction of the new shekel to boost its economy. Firstly, they reduced excessive government expenditure, much like cutting down on unnecessary personal expenses during a financial crunch. Secondly, they made the Central Bank of Israel independent of the government, allowing it to make decisions like raising interest rates when necessary. Prior to the tenure of Perez, Israel's central bank was under the direct control of the government. This made it easy for the government to print money excessively, leading to skyrocketing inflation. Perez broke this cycle by managing public finances and restraining spending, but there was still a risk of future leaders falling back into old habits. Perez needed a way to ensure that future leaders couldn't just spark rampant inflation again. His solution was to grant independence to the central bank. In other words, the central bank could act on its own, focusing solely on keeping inflation in check rather than following government orders. The government then allowed the shekel's value to drop in international exchange markets and set a fixed rate at this new low price. While this move temporarily heightened inflation, it was a necessary evil to encourage the use of the new currency. This change had a significant effect. Bank deposits in shekels increased from 3% in 1984 to 38% in 2002. Essentially, the US dollar, which was previously dominant in the Israeli economy, was replaced by a strong local currency. By the end of the decade, the inflation had returned to manageable levels, and the majority of trade within the country was conducted in their own currency. The government's stabilization plan had worked, providing valuable lessons for other countries facing similar challenges. These transformations propelled Israel into a new age of economic prosperity and stability, and this marked a major milestone in Israel's economic turnaround. In the subsequent years, Israel's economy experienced unprecedented growth, with average GDP increases nearing 5%. This brought about a period of prosperity and stability in the nation. However, Israel aspired for more than just stability. The country aimed to transform itself into one of the world's most advanced economies. After the stabilization of inflation in 1987, Israel was positioned to fully exploit its economic potential. At that time, Israel's GDP per capita was $9,000, less than half of that of the USA. However, in the ensuing 3.5 decades, Israel significantly closed this gap. Israel has experienced several significant breakthroughs that have shaped its economy. The first was the discovery of offshore natural gas, making the country self-sufficient in energy and reducing its dependence on energy imports. However, Israel wasn't content with merely exporting its natural resources and instead aimed to diversify its economy. One area of focus was tourism, which flourished due to Israel's numerous religiously significant destinations. Attracting over 4 million tourists annually, the industry significantly contributes to the country's foreign income and job creation. The country also surprisingly developed a thriving agricultural sector, despite its desert location. Israeli produce like oranges, lemons, and strawberries can often be found in European supermarkets, a testament to the country's investment in innovative technologies. These technologies, such as genetic modifications, have enabled plants to flourish using semi-saline seawater or salt water from aquifers. However, the real cornerstone of Israel's economy lies in its talented and innovative population. Israel invests twice as much in research and development as other technically advanced nations like the United States. As a result, it has fostered industries that lead the world and add substantial economic value domestically. Notably, Israel is among the world's largest producers of advanced semiconductors, a leading manufacturer of military weapon systems, and a major processor and trader of diamonds. To further fuel growth and innovation, Israel understood it needed to attract top scientists, engineers, and companies from the West. Despite the challenges of its geographical isolation and ongoing conflicts, Israel was determined to overcome these obstacles. The country recognized that simply easing regulations or lowering taxes wouldn't be enough, unlike the approach taken by countries like Ireland. This understanding led to the birth of the Yozma program, a pioneering initiative aimed at boosting entrepreneurship and fostering a culture of innovation. The Yozma program, launched in 1991, aimed to address a significant issue. Many small companies and promising projects were failing due to lack of capital. There were talented individuals with innovative ideas, but without the necessary funds to propel their projects forward. The government contemplated investing public money in these ventures, but the challenge was determining which projects to fund and who would make those decisions. To resolve this, Israel turned to venture capital, VC funds. These entities typically invest in small, disruptive, and innovative projects. The government's plan mirrored this approach, choosing potential-laden small companies and financing them for growth. They proposed a partnership with private equity funds, leading to the creation of 10 VC funds. For each fund that raised $12 million from private investors, the government would contribute $8 million. The government would hold 40% of the property, but if the investment proved successful, private investors could buy out the government's share by simply returning the initial investment plus a small interest. This strategy had two key advantages. Firstly, 60% of the investment came from private VC funds, meaning that foreign capital was pouring into Israel to support innovative local projects. This allowed the Israeli government to foster development with foreign money instead of its own. Secondly, by investing in small companies, many of which experienced substantial growth, the government could recoup its investment. Interestingly, the Yozma program had virtually zero cost to the public finances. Since its inception, the Yozma program has grown, fostering a multitude of technology companies and startups at almost no cost to the government. It has attracted foreign capital and created a vast technology network within the country. As a result, Israel has increased the number of startups in the country by 20 times, with over 6,000 currently in operation. Moreover, Israel ranks high globally in patent registrations despite its relatively small population. It's also worth noting that the strongest sector in the country is science and technology, far ahead of any other. Complementary measures such as significant tax cuts for technology companies, major investments in scientific infrastructure like incubators and public universities, a significant recruitment process for skilled immigrants, and bureaucratic streamlining have made Israel one of the easiest countries in the world to do business in according to the Doing Business ranking. Despite its short history of 75 years and a myriad of challenges, including geopolitical issues, Israel has a GDP of $488 billion, ranking it as the 29th largest economy in the world. Its GDP per capita is an impressive $52,000, placing it ahead of countries like Canada, Germany, and Japan. Israel's economic management has enabled it to become one of the world's most prosperous economies. This success story serves as a beacon of hope for other countries facing severe challenges today, indicating the potential of good economic management in shaping a better future for their people.